The soft chime of the church bells floated through the air, mingling with the scent of fresh roses that adorned every corner of St. Matthew's Chapel. Emily stood at the altar, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her bouquet, her heart pounding louder than the organ music playing in the background. The aisle stretched before her like a path she was meant to take, yet deep inside something felt strangely heavy. Her groom, Daniel, stood beside her, his smile fixed and polished, the same smile he wore at business dinners and charity galas. Emily had always told herself that stability was what she needed. Daniel was safe, predictable, the kind of man her parents approved of. But as the priest began to speak, she couldn't shake the faint ache in her chest, the whisper of a question she didn't dare to answer. Was this truly the life she wanted? The guests sat in perfect rows, faces glowing under the golden sunlight streaming through stained glass. Her mother's eyes brimmed with pride. Her father's approving nod was subtle, but firm. It all should have felt perfect, and yet it didn't. Then, just as the priest asked the congregation if there were any objections, a deep voice rang out from the back of the church. "You're marrying the wrong man." The words cut through the air like a blade. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned slowly, the train of her dress sweeping the polished floor. Standing in the doorway was a man she had seen only once before, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tailored suit that seemed sculpted to him. His presence was undeniable, commanding every gaze in the room. And though she couldn't yet understand why, her heart knew instantly, nothing about this day would ever be the same again. For a moment, silence gripped the chapel. The only sound was the faint echo of his words bouncing off the high-vaulted ceiling. Guests exchanged bewildered glances. Some leaned toward each other, whispering in urgent tones. The priest's voice faltered, his hands clutching the edge of his book, as if unsure whether to proceed or step aside. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. She remembered him, not just his face, but the way he had looked at her that night at the charity fundraiser 3 months ago. A fleeting encounter, a polite exchange of words, and a strange spark she couldn't quite name. She had told herself it was nothing. Yet now, standing in the doorway of her wedding, he looked at her as if he had every right to be here. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand, which had been resting lightly on her arm, became a grip, firm, almost possessive. "Ignore him," he murmured, his voice low but edged with steel. The man at the door didn't move closer, but his gaze was unwavering. "You don't know the truth," he said, his tone calm, deliberate, as if every syllable carried weight. "And if you marry him without hearing it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The guests shifted in their seats, the tension rippling through the room like a storm building on the horizon. Emily felt as though the walls had drawn closer, the air thickening around her. "Leave!" Daniel snapped, his voice louder now, directed at the stranger. But the man's eyes never left hers. There was no anger in them, only urgency, and something that felt like certainty. Her heart pounded. She didn't know whether to take a step forward or back. All she knew was that the life she had planned seemed suddenly fragile, as if one more word from him could shatter it completely. Emily's fingers tightened around her bouquet, the stems pressing into her palms. She could feel every heartbeat, each one urging her to do something, anything, other than stand frozen. The stranger's presence pulled her in, like a tide she couldn't resist, while Daniel's grip on her arm anchored her in place. The air between the two men crackled with unspoken tension. Daniel stood tall, his polished composure starting to fracture. "This is my wedding," he said sharply, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You have no right to be here." The man at the door took one measured step forward. "I have every right," he replied, his voice steady, but with a quiet force that commanded the room's attention. His eyes never wavered from Emily's, as though speaking to her and her alone. "Your life is about to be bound to a lie. I came to stop that." Gasps rippled through the pews. Emily's mother covered her mouth, her father's brow furrowed. The guests were no longer pretending to be polite. All eyes darted between the three of them, hungry for the next moment. Emily's mind spun. A lie? The words echoed inside her. She searched Daniel's face for some reaction. Denial, confusion, anything, but instead she found a flash of something darker. He leaned closer to her ear. "Don't listen to him. He's here to ruin us." Her breath caught. "Us?" she whispered, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. The stranger stopped a few feet short of the aisle. "You deserve the truth before you make a choice you can't undo," he said, his tone gentler now, almost pleading. Emily realized the room was holding its breath, waiting for her answer, and in that suspended moment she knew that no matter what she chose, there was no going back. Emily felt as though she stood on the edge of a cliff, with the drop hidden in mist. Every instinct told her to demand answers, yet the weight of so many eyes kept her rooted in place. The priest shifted uneasily, closing his book as if the ceremony had been silently suspended. The faint rustle of dresses and the creak of wooden pews filled the void. Daniel's grip eased just enough for her to turn toward him. "What is he talking about?" she asked, her voice low but trembling. His jaw clenched. "He's nothing. A troublemaker. I've seen his type before, men who thrive on destroying good things." His gaze flicked toward the stranger, sharp and venomous. But the stranger didn't flinch. He took another step forward, the light from the open doors outlining his silhouette. "My name is Adrian Blackwell," he said, the words falling like a challenge into the hushed space. A murmur swept through the guests. The name was not unfamiliar. Adrian Blackwell, the billionaire philanthropist who rarely appeared in public without reason. Emily's pulse quickened. She remembered reading about him. A man who funded hospitals, restored historic landmarks, and fought corporate corruption in court. But why would someone like him be here at her wedding? Adrian's gaze softened when it returned to her. "Daniel isn't who you think he is," he said quietly, but each word landed with unmistakable weight. "And if you walk down this path, you'll be tied to more than just his name." Daniel stepped in front of her, blocking her view. "Enough!" he snapped. Adrian didn't move, his voice steady. "Ask him where he was last Thursday night." The words hit her like a cold wind, and for the first time, Emily saw Daniel's polished facade crack. The question lingered in the air like the toll of a distant bell, each second stretching longer than the last. Emily's eyes narrowed on Daniel, searching for a quick, confident reply, but none came. Instead, he shifted his weight, his fingers tightening around her arm again, as if physical contact could mask hesitation. "I was working late," Daniel said finally, his tone clipped. "Why?" Adrian's gaze stayed locked on her, ignoring the groom's answer. "That's not true, and you know it," he said with quiet certainty. "Tell her, Daniel, or I will." The room was no longer just watching, it was holding its breath. Even the children in the pews had gone still. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs, the sound deafening in her own ears. Daniel laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "This is absurd. Emily, he's trying to manipulate you on the most important day of your life. He doesn't know me." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I know enough. Enough to say that the man standing beside you spent last Thursday meeting with someone he swore he had cut ties with. A woman whose signature is on more than one offshore account linked to his name." Gasps erupted from the guests. Emily's knees felt unsteady, her grip on the bouquet loosening. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to see the possibility of truth in Adrian's eyes. But she also couldn't ignore the flicker of panic she had just seen cross Daniel's face. Her mother half rose from her seat, whispering her name, But Emily couldn't move. It was as if the aisle had become a chasm, Adrian on one side, Daniel on the other, and she stood on a crumbling ledge between them. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about the truth and the cost of learning it. Emily's throat felt tight, as if her own body was warning her not to speak, but the words pushed their way out anyway. "Daniel, is that true?" For a split second, his expression softened, as if he might confess, but then his features hardened, and he forced a smile meant for the audience as much as for her. "Emily, I told you, this is your day. Don't let him ruin it with lies." Adrian didn't look away. "You deserve proof, Emily. I have it." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and produced a slim envelope, the kind used for legal documents. His every movement was deliberate, not hurried, as though he knew the weight of what he carried. Daniel stepped forward, blocking her line of sight again. "You're not giving her anything," he said sharply. "Security." His voice rang through the chapel, but no one moved. It was as if the entire congregation wanted to see where this was going. Adrian's eyes flicked past Daniel to meet hers once more. Last Thursday, he wasn't working late. He was meeting with a woman named Cassandra Moreau, the same woman who facilitated the laundering of over $20 million through shell corporations. Emily's stomach turned. She remembered hearing that name before in the news. A scandal involving stolen charity funds and political bribes. "Emily," Daniel's voice dropped, almost pleading now. "He's twisting things. She's dangerous, and I had to see her to make sure she stayed out of our lives." The explanation felt too quick, too rehearsed. Adrian's tone softened, though it carried the same urgency. "You can open this envelope now, or you can wait until after you're married. But if you wait, it might be too late to undo what comes next." The bouquet in Emily's hands felt impossibly heavy, her knuckles white as she realized the decision she made in the next few minutes could rewrite the rest of her life. The world around Emily seemed to fade, the murmurs of the guests melting into a low, indistinct hum. All she could hear was the steady thud of her own heartbeat and the faint rustle of the envelope in Adrian's hand. She stared at it, her mind pulling in two directions, one towards safety, the other toward truth. If she took it, there would be no pretending everything was fine. If she didn't, she might spend the rest of her life wondering what she had refused to see. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "If you take that, you're throwing away everything we've built, everything your family expects of you." His words were smooth, but underneath them, Emily heard the edge of control. Adrian's gaze held hers with quiet intensity. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Emily. I came because I couldn't stand by and watch you walk into something that would destroy you." Her hands trembled as she shifted her bouquet to one side. She could feel the weight of every stare in the room, her parents' confusion, the guests' curiosity, the priest's silent uncertainty. Finally, she reached out. The moment her fingertips brushed the envelope, Daniel's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Gasps echoed through the church. "Don't!" Daniel warned, his voice a low growl. Emily met his eyes, and for the first time she saw something she couldn't unsee. Fear. Not fear of losing her, but fear of being exposed. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled her wrist free and took the envelope from Adrian. Her hands shook as she broke the seal, the crisp sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. What lay inside could end everything. And as she unfolded the papers, she wasn't sure if she was ready to know. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, pressing in on Emily from all sides. She felt the weight of the entire chapel bearing down on her, as if every soul inside was waiting for her to choose which path to take. Daniel stepped toward her, his expression shifting into something softer, almost pleading. "Emily, you have to understand. The world I operate in isn't clean. I was handling it. I didn't want to drag you into it." His voice was smooth, carefully measured, but to her ears it sounded like a practiced speech. She took a step back. The space between them widened, and she could feel Adrian's presence at the far end of it, steady, unmoving, a silent anchor. "You kept this from me," she said, her voice trembling but stronger than before. "You let me stand here, ready to marry you without knowing the truth. That's not protection, Daniel, that's control." A faint murmur rippled through the guests, their whispers now less restrained. The tension in the room had shifted. It was no longer disbelief that held them, but the raw awareness that something irrevocable was unfolding before their eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So what now? You believe him over me? A man you barely know?" Emily hesitated, glancing at Adrian. His eyes didn't plead or demand. They simply met hers with the unshakable conviction that she deserved better than lies. "This isn't about him," she said finally. "It's about you, and what you've shown me today." The priest, still clutching his book, looked from one to the other as if awaiting a decision. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the moment of choice approaching, the kind that could alter the entire trajectory of her life. And she knew there would be no walking back from it. Emily's breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling as if every inhale took effort. The weight of the envelope in her hand seemed to anchor her to reality, keeping her from slipping back into the illusion that had been her life with Daniel. The priest cleared his throat, his voice tentative. "Shall we proceed?" The question hung awkwardly in the air, as though he already knew the answer would not be simple. Daniel turned to the congregation, his smile brittle. "Yes, we should. This interruption has gone on long enough." He extended his hand toward Emily, palm up, as if offering her a way to salvage the moment, but she didn't move. Her eyes fixed on his outstretched hand, and all she could see were the photographs burned into her mind. Him sitting with Cassandra, the timestamp glaring like a warning. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. A collective gasp swept through the room. Daniel's hand lowered slowly, his expression shifting from shock to something colder. "Emily, think about what you're doing. Everything we've planned, everything you've planned," she interrupted, her voice stronger now. "I thought we were building a future together, but you were building something else entirely, something I don't want to be part of." From the back of the church, Adrian remained silent, his presence alone enough to steady her resolve. His eyes held no triumph, only quiet understanding. Daniel's composure cracked, his voice hardened. "You're making a mistake." Emily shook her head. "The mistake would be marrying you." A murmur of agreement and sympathy stirred among the guests. The golden light through the stained glass seemed warmer now, almost protective. For the first time since the ceremony began, Emily felt the faintest sense of freedom and the terrifying vastness of what might come next. Emily lowered her bouquet, the white roses trembling in her grasp. The aisle that had once looked like a path to a secure future now seemed more like a tunnel she was stepping out of, leaving behind the shadows that had nearly swallowed her. Daniel's expression hardened further, his jaw tightening until the muscle twitched. "So, that's it? You're walking away because of him?" He gestured sharply toward Adrian, his voice rising in accusation. "This isn't about him," she replied, her voice calm now, anchored in a clarity she hadn't felt in months. "It's about me, and the fact that you made choices without me, choices that put us both in danger." Daniel took a step toward her, but Adrian moved subtly forward, not closing the distance, just enough to remind everyone that Emily wasn't alone anymore. The unspoken challenge between them filled the space with electric tension. "You'll regret this," Daniel said, his tone lower now, almost a warning. Emily met his eyes steadily. "The only thing I'd regret is finding out the truth too late." She turned slightly, facing the guests. Their faces reflected a mix of shock, sympathy, and in some, quiet approval. Emily's mother rose slowly from her seat, her eyes glistening, and gave a small nod, a silent gesture that seemed to say, "I understand." Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped away from Daniel. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked down the aisle, past the rows of watching eyes, toward the man who had disrupted everything, but somehow made her feel safer than she had in years. When she reached Adrian, he didn't speak. He simply extended his arm, an invitation rather than a command. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before placing her hand on it. The church doors stood open, sunlight spilling inside, and together they stepped into it. The cool rush of outside air wrapped around Emily like a cleansing wind, sweeping away the heavy scent of roses and the suffocating tension of the chapel. The sunlight was almost blinding after the dim interior, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting the warmth settle on her skin. Adrian guided her down the stone steps, his pace unhurried, giving her space to breathe. The murmurs from inside spilled out through the open doors, shocked voices, scattered applause, and the low rumble of Daniel's anger. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly, still clutching the envelope. "I did," Adrian replied, his voice low but unwavering, "because sometimes walking away is harder than staying, and you needed someone to remind you that you had a choice." His words sank deep. For months, Emily had ignored her instincts, convincing herself that doubts were just cold feet, that loyalty meant silence. But now, with the weight of Daniel's lies laid bare, she realized loyalty without truth was just another kind of prison. They reached the edge of the courtyard, where a sleek black car waited. The driver stepped forward, opening the door, but Adrian didn't usher her inside right away. "Where you go from here is up to you," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'm not here to decide for you, but whatever you choose, make sure it's yours." Emily looked back at the chapel, the tall spire cutting into the bright sky. She thought of the vows she would have spoken, the life she would have entered, a life built on a foundation already cracked. And for the first time all day, she smiled, faint but real. "I already have," she said. With that, she stepped into the car, carrying nothing from her old life except the truth. The car door closed with a muted thud, sealing off the lingering noise of the chapel. Inside, the leather seats were cool, the air faintly scented with cedar. Adrian slid in beside her, but he didn't speak. His silence wasn't heavy or awkward. It was a kind of respect, an acknowledgement that she needed this moment to collect herself. The city stretched out beyond the tinted windows, the streets alive with the ordinary rhythm of a day that, for most people, was just another Sunday. But for Emily, it was the day her life split in two, the before and the after. She glanced at the envelope still in her lap. It no longer felt like a burden. It was proof, a reminder of the moment she had chosen herself over appearances, over expectation, over fear. Adrian finally broke the quiet. "You were brave in there." Emily shook her head gently. "No, I was late, but not too late." They exchanged a small smile, one not of triumph, but of understanding. She didn't know what would come next. Maybe she'd spend months rebuilding, maybe she'd face whispers and judgments, but she also knew she would never again ignore the voice inside her that told her when something was wrong. As the car rolled forward, the sun dipped slightly, casting long beams of light through the glass. Emily rested her hand on the window and watched the world pass by, each turn taking her farther from the life she had almost lived, and closer to the one she would create. Turning slightly toward Adrian, she said, "Thank you for showing up." He met her gaze. Sometimes, showing up changes everything. And for Emily, it already had.